We are linked to the great and the repeated story of God's faithfulness. We are linked to that story. Now, this might seem a bit pablum. Have you seen this before? Probably you have. Absolutely you have. But this is something that is such a huge part of our faithful understanding. For me, as a Christian, I have to recognize and trust that I'm linked to the great repeated story of God's faithfulness. How so? How do I know that story? Pastor Lilliard read in our passage from Isaiah one of the stories that is the great repeated stories of God's faithfulness. Let me give it a context here for a little teaching moment about the book of Isaiah, the context of Isaiah chapter 40. Beginning, long time ago, many years before the book of Isaiah, 1000 was the year King David united the tribes of Israel. You know, the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the musical. Fast forward a few hundred years and boom, King David comes and says, you're all part of one nation. And Jerusalem is the capital. That was about 1000 BC, okay? Long time ago. But this is all relevant to our being caught up in the story of God's goodness for the world, okay? 721, the northern kingdom. The northern part of Israel was defeated by the Babylonian Empire. I won't go into details why, but this is the when that it happened. Such as to say, though, that the Babylonian Empire was very strong in those days, and whenever the surrounding empire of Israel was strong, it was obviously the case that Israel was weak. And whenever the surrounding empires were weak, then Israel was strong. So Babylon continued to be really strong. In 586, the southern kingdom was defeated also. So the north was defeated then, now the southern kingdom is defeated. Now both have been defeated, and there is what we call the Babylonian exile. You shall leave your home, you shall leave your temple that was built by Solomon. You shall leave all those places that you value, that you're secure in, and you will be weary, because you will go to Babylon and they will have their way with you. Babylonian captivity, 587 to 539. 48 years gone. 539. Cyrus the Great, the king of Assyria, defeated the Babylonians. The Assyrians take over and they change the whole tune. They say to the children of Israel, you may go home and begin rebuilding that which you knew before. But 48 years was the reality in the Babylonian exile. 48 long years. And as Isaiah 40 was read by Pastor Lilliard, the weariness, but the promise that God will abide with you. In retrospect, the Jewish community looks back and said, God has resided with us. So this past week on Tuesday, anybody that's on the Synod newsletter list of the Minneapolis Area Synod got an email in it. And in it was a blog entry from the assistant to the bishop, Craig Peterson, who is responsible for our territory. And I've known Craig Peterson since I sang with him in the Gustavus Choir many years ago, and so it's great to reconnect with him. In this column that he wrote on Tuesday, he talked about a conference that he went to about the state of the church. The state of the church. And I need to look at my notes here to make sure I get my statistics correct about American Christianity. Pre-pandemic, Craig wrote that there were about 75 to 100 closings of American churches per week. And per year, about 3,750 to 5,000 closings per week of American congregations. At this training seminar that he went to, they informed him that with the pandemic happening, those rates have accelerated. And so now it is said that 100,000 congregations will close their doors in the next 3 to 5 years in America. 100,000 in the next 3 to 5 years. And then he brought it down personal when he said, on my dry erase board in my office at the Synod, there are names of 15 congregations, 10% of the congregations of our Synod, that are all in this process of transitioning. His conference was about how to transition church communities to rethink their ministries and sell their buildings. 15 congregations in the Minneapolis area Synod are in this circumstance. These are not easy things for me to read. We talk about them as a staff all the time. We think creatively and we want to do things that are visionary and show support for all of you in your faith lives. Because we believe that we are caught up in a story, in a great story that repeats itself of God's love and forgiveness in the world through Jesus. We work really hard at that. And then Craig Peterson's blog entry comes in, and once again we're thrown into, I'm a little weary here in the process. I remember talking with someone a couple of weeks ago who's not a member here at St. Andrew, but he's decided that for his memorial service, he's going to do it in a bar, so that people are able to tell stories about him and to be together and enjoy and have fun, but it's not going to be in any congregation. A couple of years ago, I went to a hotel ballroom and didn't participate in, but I attended a memorial service of someone who also didn't want to have anything to do with the church, and we did it in the hotel ballroom. And I wonder, am I going to be doing more memorial services only by the graveside? Or am I going to be doing memorial services in those kinds of places in the future? But I want to draw your attention to the Babylonian exile here, and I want to impress upon you, and if we want to show our friends at home who are watching again this slide, the Babylonian exile was 48 years long, but God was not done with the children of Israel. It's why we tell these stories. If we don't have congregations and we don't have memorial services that tell people that they are cared for through eternity through Christ's love, at least those of you who are in attendance here and who are watching online, we are getting ourselves caught up in the story that gives us what we need to trust and to hope. At least I think so, for when we approach our weary times. The Babylonian exile has been termed something that the human family of faith has gone through before. Not just in Babylon either, but there are other times and other seasons where there was captivity, where there was a confusion and even a despair and weariness. But God had a way for Cyrus the Great to come along from Assyria and get the children of Israel back on the move once again. So what do we hear? That God's been here before? That God's not done yet? That God's promise to be with weary people does not just evaporate. We grow weary, as Isaiah says, but God does not grow weary. God does not, will not, and we believe he cannot grow weary. Not as a loving parent, not as a father who loves his children.